Hello, friends. Do you love tea and natural wellness products as much as I do? I've partnered with Positively Tea and Positively Botanicals, and I can honestly say I drink their organic loose leaf tea almost every day, and I love it. From organic teas to natural remedies, they offer high-quality products that support a healthy, mindful lifestyle. When you shop through my affiliate link, you not only discover amazing products for yourself, but you also help support the podcast. Visit the link in the show notes to explore their selections today. And for you coffee lovers, they have you covered as well. Treat yourself, support the show, and keep connecting with the natural world. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Nature Wanderer. I'm Paul, and I'd like to welcome you today to this episode about a really neat little guy that I was introduced to a few months ago when I went on vacation with my wife to Costa Rica. Very beautiful country. I encourage anyone to go visit there. Make sure you spend a lot of time. They have beautiful, beautiful nature there. But anyhow, I noticed several times when I was there, this tiny insect that kept crossing my path, literally. When I was walking down the trail every once in a while, I'd see these little ants walking in a straight line across the trail in front of me. Luckily, I saw them a couple of times. My wife was like, whoa, wait a minute, watch your step. Yeah, because they were like everywhere, it seemed. We were on this one back trail trying to find this beach that I saw that was supposed to be really secluded. And we went down this road that was a little bit scary. And we finally got to the end. There's this really terrible parking lot. If you could even call it a parking lot. I was afraid we wouldn't be able to turn around. But anyhow, we got out of the car and it's like, okay, according to my phone app, the trail is supposed to be right here. And I'm looking, it's like, oh, there it is. So we start wandering down this trail, looking at the water that we were at. And it's like, that's not much of a beach there. It's one of the worst beaches I ever seen, and we were trying to figure out how to get there, so we figured, well, let's just keep going down this trail. Eventually we'll come across it. And we kept coming across these ants crossing in a straight line. Now, they weren't just any ant. These were leafcutter ants. Now, leafcutter ants are very interesting insects. Whenever we saw them, they were crossing the trail, or sometimes they were off on the side of the trail. The one time I decided I'm going to get a video of them, and I started videotaping them, and I was walking along, making sure I didn't step on them, and which unfortunately, because they do cross the trails, we did see a lot of dead ones where people weren't paying attention and they did step on them, but they still were continuing to go across the trails. And anyhow, I was videotaping them and I kept walking further and further and further. And it's almost like this is not going to end. I must have walked about 50 yards and they still were going. And it's like, I got to find out more about these guys. And it's not like you're seeing, I mean, around here in the U.S., I do see ants, and they will go on their journeys in that straight line. But this time, these guys were carrying leaves, pieces of leaves, sometimes, depending on the size of the leaf, whole leaves. And so you have this like little trail of green moving through the forest or moving along the trail. It was so interesting. So sit back and relax and enjoy this journey as we wander into the lives of leafcutter ants. Now these leafcutter ants, like I said, we saw them all over Costa Rica. The one time we had this Airbnb that had a pool behind us, and it had a little bit of a garden. Pretty much the entire backyard is a big garden. And there was another house behind us, but you could barely see it because of this wall of trees and bushes and flowers. So the one day we were in the pool, my wife and I are cooling off, and I'm sitting there on the edge of the pool just relaxing, and suddenly I notice the leaves going by all along the edge of the pool. And I went over and I started following them, and I went over to the other end of the pool, and there they were over there. And I tried to figure out where they're going, where they're coming from. And I never really was able to trace exactly where they're going, because they did go behind this one outbuilding, and I never saw them come out. So I imagine they were going somewhere behind there. But they were coming from the other direction. And it's like, well, from point A to point B would have been much straighter if they went. They need someone like me to guide them, or maybe they need Google Maps. But it was just fascinating. My wife just kept laughing at me because I was just so intrigued by these guys. And that's when I'm like, I need to know more about these leafcutter ants. So I did a lot of research trying to figure out what they were all about. I spent a lot of time in Costa Rica researching them, and every time we saw them, I had to watch them. And I did do some videos of them. I'll upload a couple of videos of them onto my YouTube channel, and I'll put a link in the show notes to them. But they're so fascinating. So who are these leafcutter ants? Well, they're in the genera Atta, A-T-T-A, and Acromyrmex. Okay, so I didn't give you a species name this time. Well, because leafcutter ants cover several different species. And they live in Central and South America, including Costa Rica, where I was, which is Central America. Now, ants live in colonies, but they're really famous because of the size of their colonies. You will have huge colonies that number in the millions of ants. Not hundreds, not thousands, but millions of ants in one colony. Now, they are called leafcutter ants, which means they go out and they cut up leaves and they eat. No, they don't. A lot of people think that they eat the leaves and that's why they're cutting them, but they don't. And this is another reason why they're so fascinating to me. I always was under the assumption that they were cutting them, taking them back to the colony, and eating them. But they aren't. They are cutting the leaves with their very sharp mandibles. Now, they will carry them back to their nest, their colony. There, they will chew them up into a pulp. And this pulp is actually used to grow a fungus. It's a specialized fungus. This fungus actually allows them to eat. That's what they feed on, is the fungus, not the leaves. It's the fungus that grows off the leaves. So they're chewing them up into this pulp and they're farming with it. So how does this farming work? So you have the foragers who head out in these steady, purposeful lines and snip fresh vegetation from the trees or shrubs or even garden plants. They are picky. Different plant species have different chemical defenses, and ants will abandon a tree entirely if it makes their fungus sick. Those leaf fragments that they do harvest, those are hoisted overhead onto their backs like sails, and they march them back to the nest. Now, inside the nest, there's smaller worker ants that take over. They're the ones who chew the leaves into this soft pulp. mixing in their own saliva and also fecal droplets that contain enzymes. This breaks the plant material down and actually detoxifies it from any of the toxicity that it has. Then the pulp is then carefully placed into the fungus chambers. Think of it like compost, but curated. Now, the ants then cultivate a specific fungus, Leucoagaricus gongylophorus. This fungus does not survive in the wild on its own anymore. It's actually been domesticated by the ants through millions of years of selective care. The fungus grows thread-like filaments and produces swollen, nutrient-rich tips, which we call gangliodia. That is the actual food that the ants eat. Ant larvae live on it, and adults snack on it as well. Now, like any farm, they do have diseases, and the leafcutter ants solve that problem by carrying a bacterium called pseudonocardia on their bodies. This bacteria actually produces antibiotics that suppress any parasitic fungus. That way, it can't wipe out the ant garden. So ants are actively, basically, doing weed control on any infected patches and apply their bacterial medicine wherever it's needed. So it's kind of like agriculture with a hygiene protocol. Now, down in the chambers where all this gardening is happening, and the living chambers as well, there's a really great ventilation system. There's thousands of chambers. Remember, there's millions of ants there. Thousands of chambers. They're all connected by tunnels, and that regulates the temperature, humidity, and carbon dioxide levels. The worker ants adjust openings, kind of like a tiny HVAC system, and that keeps the fungus in its comfort zone. That allows them to regulate the temperature, humidity, and carbon dioxide levels. So all of this is done through changing how the air flows. It's almost like a living ventilation system. Now, another interesting thing about this whole system is when a young queen decides to leave and start her own colony, she actually carries a pellet of the fungus in a pocket under her mouth. And she goes and starts her own colony with an heirloom strain that's been passed down through generations, allowing that fungus to survive. So what's going on here with all this gardening is a mutual dependence. I mean, the ants can't survive without this fungus, and the fungus actually cannot survive without the ants. It can't spread without the ants. It's basically a locked partnership, and it's older than many of the forests that they actually live under. Now, with colonies in the thousands doing all this work, all this gardening to stay alive, of course, you need to have a society or a colony with good structure. Now, leafcutter ants run on a caste system that feels less like a hierarchy and more like a finely tuned organism, each body type shaped for a very specific task. So basically, they're one species with many professions. Now, first of all, you have the queen. She is what we would call the living archive. The queen is not a ruler so much as a biological engine. She can live well over a decade, sometimes two. The average is about 15 years. She produces millions of eggs over her lifetime. Her body is optimized for reproduction, not decision making. After her nuptial flight, she sheds her wings, seals herself underground, plants her fungal starter, which she got from her last hive, and she begins laying eggs. From that point on, she never leaves the nest again. Everything the colony becomes is written through her. Now, the next group are the minions. They're kind of the unseen caretakers. Minions are the smallest workers and arguably the most important. They live deep inside the nest where the fungus grows. Their jobs include grooming the fungal garden, which includes removing spores and debris. They also are the ones who feed the larvae, and they tend to the eggs. They are the ones who are always applying the antibiotic secretions to infected patches in the garden. They are the ones who are riding on leaf fragments during transport to actually fend off parasitic flies. So they're one of the most important workers in the nest. Now, the next group are the miners, or we could call them the logistics crew. They're slightly larger than the minions. The miners are the generalists. They basically handle leaf processing and pulp preparation. They do transport inside the nest. They do any expansion and restructuring of the garden. And they assist with the brood care. If the colony were a factory, the miners would actually be the people constantly in motion, shifting resources from where they arrive to where they are needed. Now, the next group are the medias, the harvest specialists. Yeah, the medias are the iconic leaf carriers that you see in the photos. Their size gives them the strength and jaw power to cut vegetation efficiently. So they're the ones who scout and select plant material. They cut the leaves into transportable pieces, and they carry the fragments long distances back to the nest. They also make judgment calls about plant chemistry. If a food source harms the fungus, medias will mark it as off limits, and they redirect the harvest elsewhere. Now, the last group that we have are the majors, or the soldiers. They're the guardians. The majors have massive heads and jaws built for force, not finesse. Yeah, their roles include defending foraging trails and nest entrances. They crush tough plant material and seeds, and they act as mobile barricades during attacks. They rarely farm directly. Their presence allows everyone else to work without constant interruption. Now, what's especially elegant is that caste is influenced by nutrition and colony needs, not fixed genetics. Larvae fed more fungus develop into larger workers or soldiers. In times of stress, colonies can shift their production towards certain castes, reshaping their workforce like a living budget relocation. Now, if you want to think of the colony as a body, you can look at the queen as the reproductive system. The workers are the muscles and hands. The minions are the immune system. And the majors are the armor. No single ant understands the whole plan. Yet together, they grow food, control disease, defend territory, and they persist for decades. So let's talk a little bit about these super highways in the rainforest that I briefly mentioned earlier. All the rainforest visits that I have done, and I've seen these guys, especially down in Costa Rica. The Leafcutter ant trail is not chaos. It may look like it sometimes, but it's not. It is actually very choreographed. What looks like a scramble is actually a regulated highway system. It cuts through the forest, litter, and grass, and they even have traffic flow, right-of-ways, maintenance crews. Yeah, so it's very organized highway system for them. Now, the leafcutter trails are semi-permanent corridors. They are cleared of debris. Ants remove sticks, pebbles, vegetation, sometimes even smoothing the soil. Now, in heavily used routes, the trail becomes compacted and slightly sunken. A groove will actually be worn in by thousands of feet and mandibles, all these ants trampling that ground down. Now, these trails can stretch hundreds of meters from nest to food source, and they branch like river deltas. Chemical signals will guide everything. They have pheromones, and these pheromones make these lines that are laid out by the scouts and reinforced by returning workers. And these pheromone lines act like basically like arrows that only the ants can see, though. The stronger the pheromone, the busier the road. Now, the traffic is not at random. Okay, there is usually a very clear two-lane system, and I noticed that when I was watching them in Costa Rica. You'd have one group going out from the nest on one side and another group coming back on the other side. So it was just like a road. The outbound ants travel very light. They're moving away from the nest, and they're usually much quicker than the inbound ants, which are returning with a heavy load carrying leaf fragments. Now, the ants tend to keep to their side, minimizing collisions. When the trail narrows, outbound ants usually yield more often, letting the valuable cargo through. So the leaves are calories, and calories have priority. Now, when I was watching the ants, especially when I was just relaxing in the pool, watching them go along the edge of the pool, I did notice that a couple of times there was ants that, they kind of bit off more than they could chew. The leaf looked a little bit too big for them, and they were having a little difficulty carrying it. And the one time I actually saw one ant where the leaf fell over, and he was trying to pick it up. And one of the outbound ants actually stopped, helped him. And then once he got it back up, he went back on his way to the nest, and the other one went on its way to the food source. So it was interesting to see that little bit of cooperation amongst them. That's how important this food is to them. So the loaded ants, the inbound ants, generally get precedence. If two ants meet head on, the unladen ant will often step aside, climb off the trail edge, or briefly reverse to clear space if they can. On steep or slippery sections, ants may pause to let carriers stabilize before passing. So they're very organized in this whole process of collecting these leaf particles. Now, as I was saying, the leaf-carrying ants, they move more slowly, but they keep consistent spacing to avoid pileups. And I did notice that. Only once did I notice one ant passing another. And that's because the one ant was having difficulty with its leaf. It had too big a leaf, and it was having a lot of trouble, so the other one was keeping its distance, and finally I noticed there was a gap of incoming, or I should say outgoing ants, the unladen ants, and so he saw his chance to pass, and he did pass to get his load back. But that only happened once. Most of the time that I saw them, they were going all at the same pace. So they were not rushing each other. And usually, I noticed if one ant stopped, the ants behind would adjust their speed rather than crash into the other one. Now, the whole time that all this is happening, the trails are actively managed. So ants remove fallen debris, others repair eroded sections. Some individuals reinforce pheromone signals. If the rain comes along and washes part of the trail away, the ants will quickly reroute traffic, or sometimes they rebuild if it's not a serious damage. Sometimes they'll do that overnight. Trails are living infrastructure for them. Now, as far as security and escorts go, they have to worry as they're going along. Well, first of all, I saw a lot of paths where there were a lot of crushed ants and human footprints, but they have to worry about other things like predators, birds, other animals that want to eat them. So they need some sort of security. And there are small minions sometimes that will ride atop leaf fragments. Their job is defense. There's a parasitic fly that often try to lay eggs on leaf carriers, and minions fend them off, snapping, waving. They look like tiny little bodyguards. On high-risk routes, you'll see more escorts appearing. Now, when you have junctions, ants follow the strongest pheromone trail, but they are not locked in. If congestion builds or maybe food quality drops along a trail, the scouts explore alternatives. When a better route is found, pheromone reinforcement shifts traffic gradually, like a detour sign that gets brighter each hour. Now, if danger does appear, a crushed ant, a predator, or sudden chemical threat, the rules change instantly. Trails will actually dissolve, traffic reverses, and the highway empties in seconds. Now, I never noticed that, and I got pretty close to some of the trails at times. Like I said, the one time I was actually walking right over the top of a trail. I was keeping my feet on both sides so I didn't squish anybody, but I was taking the video walking, right along the trail, and they didn't scatter. They seemed to think I was okay. But sometimes they will empty the trail if they see great danger. Order gives way to survival, then quietly reforms once the risk passes. So these leafcutter trails are very organized. They have the protection, they have rules, they have laws, they have the chemistry. Everything is in these trails to help these guys survive. Now, let's talk a little bit about the leafcutter nest and its architecture. Well, you have the highway tunnels. So you have these tunnels that go down to the fungus gardens, which is another section of this underground city. And they need these highway tunnels for the incoming ants and the outgoing ants. Of course, they need waste chambers too. And I talked about the ventilation earlier. They do have ventilation shafts as well. So the engineering, it's actually very brilliant. They have the climate control, they have the airflow, humidity regulation. All is done through these ventilation shafts. And then they have the big fungus garden, the tunnels for transporting the food, for moving around in the nest, and they have the waste chambers. Now, some nests can actually reach 20 feet deep, 100 plus feet wide, and contain millions of ants. Those are pretty huge nests. So why are these ants so important? Why not just squish them all? We were always taught as kids, we don't want them in our house, so squish them. That's not a good thing. The leafcutter ants, you could say they shape ecosystems. They prune plants, stimulating more growth. They aerate the soil more than earthworms do in some places. Actually, in many places, the research I read says that they actually will aerate more soil than earthworms in many places. Their nests redistribute nutrients. Their trails create microhabitats for other animals. So all of these things are helping the ecology of the rainforest. Now, of course, I do want to note the bad side, just to be fair. Their impact is pretty major on some agriculture plantations. Remember, they're eating these plants, the leaves. I shouldn't say they're eating them, but they're cutting them. So they're cutting the leaves on the plants, and when you have a million ants in a nest, in a colony, and they're going in, and they could wreak pretty much a lot of havoc in an agricultural field. Now, there has to be a balance between ecological importance and human conflict. So I looked up research on this, and I didn't find a whole lot, but I hope that the plantations, the farms, I hope they're using deterrents for the ants, not just killing them with pesticides. But I couldn't find much information on that. And if I do find some information, I'll put it in the show notes. Now, here's some really cool and surprising facts about these ants. First of all, their jaws contain zinc. That's a type of metal. So essentially, they have metal-edged cutters. That's what helps them cut these leaves so easily. I talked a little bit about the minions and how they ride on some of the leaves to guard against parasitic flies. I thought that was pretty interesting that they will actually do that. I don't understand why the minions don't just walk along themselves, but I guess if they're up on top, they have a better angle at getting at these flies, better vision. It's almost like they're up in the turret of a castle. Now, leafcutters cut 15 to 20% of all plant material in some forests. That's quite a bit of plant material. But once again, they are pruning, so they are stimulating more growth in the forest. But you can understand if they're taking 15 to 20% of all plant material in some, and this is not everywhere, it's just in some of the forests that they're in. If they're doing that, can you imagine what they're doing to an agricultural plantation? Yeah, they can do a lot of damage. Now, I talked about those highway trails, and I thought this was a pretty interesting fact about them. They can actually last for decades. Yeah, that's a long time for a trail. Now, I remember when I was at this one area of the rainforest in Costa Rica, there were ants that were walking along the edge of this hill. They gouged out almost like a tunnel walkway, but it was open on the outside. So it's like you could see them walking along this trail. Hey, it protects them from the rain, and that can last for decades, that trail. So I hope you enjoyed learning about the leafcutter ants. If you ever get a chance to go to a rainforest where there are leafcutter ants, make sure you keep your eyes open along the trail for these moving green lines crossing the trail or going along the edge of the trail. I ran across them quite a bit when I was in the rainforest in Costa Rica, and like I said, in some of the villages and in some of the Airbnbs that we stayed at. So they are very interesting to watch. So don't just say, oh, that's cool, look at that. No, stop and watch them for a while. Watch their lines going by. Watch the organization that they have. It's very fascinating to watch. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening today. Be certain to share the podcast with your nature-loving friends so that they too can learn more about the natural world around them. If you'd like to support the podcast, visit the show notes for a link to my Ko-Fi page. You can also support the podcast by purchasing awesome items at my online merch store. And if you like to journal your wanderings through nature, be certain to purchase a Nature Wanderer Nature Journal. All the links are in the show notes. Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Stop back in 2 weeks for another episode of the Nature Wanderer podcast. Have a great one and keep exploring the nature around you. Hello, friends. I hope you're out wandering through nature, exploring the natural world around you. Do you enjoy writing about your wanderings? Nature journaling is an awesome, fun way to remember all the adventures you have taken and how you felt during those journeys. If you're looking for some beautiful journals to keep track of all your wanderings, I have several available on Amazon, including some guided journals for children. Start your journey in journaling by clicking on the link in the show notes. Keep exploring the nature around you and keep journaling all your wanderings. Hey there, fellow nature wanderers. If you're like me, you love spending time outdoors, breathing in that fresh air and connecting with the natural world. But at home, have you ever thought about what's in the products you use every single day? That's why I'm excited to share Apple Valley Natural Soap with you. Their handcrafted all-natural soaps are made with organic ingredients, essential oils, and no harsh chemicals. Awesome! So they're not only great for your skin, but they're safe for the planet. And they don't just stop at soap. Apple Valley Natural Soap also carries a full line of natural skincare products, including shampoos, body butters, facial bars, and more. All designed to nourish your skin without synthetic ingredients. You can't beat that. That's just awesome. Whether you're hiking in the woods or just winding down after a long day, their products bring a little bit of nature right into your home. And the best part? By supporting Apple Valley Natural Soap through the Nature Wanderer, you're also supporting this podcast. Just head to the show notes and click on the link for Apple Valley Natural Soap. So go ahead, treat yourself and the environment to something better. Your skin and Mother Nature will thank you.